Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio, on this fantastic Friday, brought to you by the fine folks at Hard Truth here at the Hard Truth Distilling Company Studios, joined now by Zach Osterman, Indiana's insider for the Indy Star. And Zach, this is just what you would call a pretty damn big weekend on the IU campus for sports. There's so much going on. You've got Hoosier Hysteria tonight, of course, for men's and women's basketball, in addition to the men's soccer program hosting Michigan State at 7 in a match. And then, of course, a gigantic game for Indiana tomorrow, one of the biggest games that they've had on campus in a long time, because there is so much meaning to this game. As a matter of fact, I can't remember a game. Cincinnati was one of those games, but other than that, I can't really remember a game that had so much lying on it, that with so much more behind it yet.
No, I mean, I think we've all been trying to, I guess, contextualize this in different ways. And I mean, part of me has wondered if this is the biggest game, and obviously I wasn't around for it, but the biggest game since Michigan State in '87, which was effectively the Big Ten championship game that year, and Michigan State won, but it kind of came down to,
wasn't that on the road?
No, it was. I'm looking this up. I'm looking this up right now, but I'm almost certain it was here.
I remember like a 51-7 loss, but I couldn't remember if it was
one way or the other.
It was here, because I know Bill Mallory went over and spoke in their locker room.
Yeah, maybe it was there, maybe it was here. Either way, the point is, I mean, it's the first time since 1993 that Indiana's hosted a Big Ten team, or a Big Ten game where both teams were ranked with fans in the stands. And I know that's a lot of qualifiers, but I do think it's important to kind of set the COVID season aside. Not that what happened during the COVID season didn't matter, just that it is different. It is, it was a different kind of challenge. There were things about it that were probably easier. There were certainly things about it that were harder. I'm not diminishing anything anyone did during the 2020 season. I just don't think you can compare it to what you'd call maybe something more normal, if you want to say. And so, if you are counting games in front of fans, it's the first time since '93 that both teams in a Big Ten matchup at Memorial Stadium will be ranked in at least one of the polls. I think there's, just in general, I think Indiana has kind of moved itself out of the bottom of the Big Ten with the wins that it's picked up through the first half of the season. Now, the question is essentially, where does Indiana fit into the middle of the Big Ten? Is it above even what you maybe call the middle class, teams like Nebraska, like Washington, I'm not trying to be flippant, maybe Michigan this year. Michigan may not be, really the top end of the conference the way they've been the last, 3, 4, 5 years, or most of the last 3, 4, 5 years. So my point is, these next 2 to 3 games at least feel like they're kind of this like maybe 3-week stretch. I think these 3 weeks in particular, Nebraska, Washington, at Michigan State, are kind of the measuring stick for whether or not we get to talk about Indiana as a playoff contender into the portion of the season where that matters. If you're a playoff contender on October 18th, great, but that doesn't really mean anything. If you are a playoff contender on November 18th, that's when it means something. And, Indiana, obviously that Michigan game is the 9th. And after that, Indiana's got another bye week than its last 2 games. But I feel like it's these next 3 games that sort of tell us if Indiana goes 2-1 or even 3-0 in this stretch, then we're allowed to talk about Indiana as more than just a feel-good story. We're allowed to talk about Indiana as a genuine playoff contender, Big Ten title contender, etc. That's the platform IU has built for itself. But now the question is, can it stand on that? And this weekend, homecoming, national audience on TV, big noon kickoff in Bloomington. It's going to be a great weekend weather-wise. Those who follow like football recruiting, seems like there's some interesting things happening over there this weekend, and some other bits and pieces. this weekend feels like it is kind of a lot of these factors and elements queuing up together. And I think the question I have is just, can Indiana football kind of finally meet its moment?
Yeah, because everything is lined up, but for them, but everything is lined up for them this year. And it starts with the schedule, how it laid out. That's why it was, I'm not going to say I look like Nostradamus because it didn't, and I'm not. But that path to 6-0, it didn't take a mental heavyweight to figure that out. But it was the fact of being around the program where you could tell this is different. There's things that are just different. It was palpable. But now here they are, and now it gets real, and you've got to win games that are going to be more difficult. Obviously, this is the best defense they have faced this season, but this is going to be one of the better defenses that Nebraska has faced this season, and Nebraska has not faced an offense like they're about to see. It's going to this is going to come down to Nebraska's defense and Indiana's offense. Can Indiana's offensive line, who has done a yeoman's job this year, they allowed only 1 sack per game, while Nebraska is averaging over 3 sacks per game. How's that going to play out? As long as Curtis Rourke can still get the ball off and that is not interrupted, I don't think that Nebraska can stop Indiana. They can slow them down, but they're pretty prolific, and they're pretty versatile. That's the thing that I think it makes them so difficult. They have the 4th best running game in the Big Ten, the best passing game in the Big Ten, one of the best overall offenses. And to me, that's going to be the difference. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I don't see Indiana getting into the 40s this week, and Nebraska will get on the board, but I still think that will wind up being a 2-score game because Indiana is so strong in the second half, and that is one of their best characteristics. Man, they don't let up, Zach.
Yeah, I think the bigger question I have for Indiana is Nebraska is almost certainly the most disruptive defense they faced, and may wind up being the most disruptive defense they face, period, all season. Nebraska is tops in the conference in sacks, in tackles for loss. Nebraska is one of only 7 Big Ten teams with at least 10 turnovers forced or turnovers gained, depending on how you want to, have that kind of conversation. Only 6 Big Ten teams to get to double-digit turnovers forced in just 6 games. In particular, they are very good. I think they're tied for 3rd in the conference in team interceptions. They have 7 on the season, so they're picking off more than 1 pass per game. It's when you play a team like Northwestern, I don't think Kurt Cignetti was wrong to say that Northwestern was a really good defensive team. To that point, the best defensive team Indiana had seen. But that was, I think Northwestern was the kind of team where it's just sort of the challenge is, they'll meet you straight up. You have to be more physical. You have to execute better. They're just a tough, sturdy, balanced, well-coached defensive unit. Nebraska is a playmaking defensive unit. They've got a really good defensive line. They'll rotate in some key spots without losing much, so you're facing fresh legs a lot. They are built to exploit your mistakes. And Indiana doesn't make a ton of those, but Nebraska does force quite a few of them. And so it's not just about, maybe being, more physical or executing better. It's about playing a cleaner game than Nebraska. Now, the flip side to that is, and this is one reason why I think the bowl game, or not the bowl game, I'm sorry, the bye week, good grief. The bye week is a fascinating wrinkle to this for both sides. Is Nebraska, frankly, has not been a great team offensively. They're averaging 28 points per game, which is 10th in the conference. Obviously, you would expect a lot of what they do to be built around passing the ball, but they're 8th in the conference in passing yards per game. They're 10th in the conference in total yards per game. Indiana's outgaining Nebraska on average by about 135 yards a game, and Indiana's outscoring Nebraska on average by almost 20 points a game. Now, I don't expect that. Like you, I don't think this is going to be a blowout. I don't think Indiana's going to win this the way, for example, it won the UCLA game or even the Maryland game where, okay, they win by 2 touchdowns. Really, it's 3. Maryland scores that last touchdown in what we would absolutely classify as garbage time. But you do have a freshman quarterback over there, and you do have a Nebraska team that, that only scored 14 in the win against Rutgers, that really kind of needed to fight and scrap to get to 28 against Purdue, a Purdue team that even with a little bit of a resurgence here has been giving up points for fun against other FBS opponents. They only scored 24 against Illinois. They haven't scored more than 34 points since the beginning of September. They put 40 on UTEP in their first game. That's kind of the only time they've broken 40 points. So I think you are in a situation where it's sort of this balancing act of, Nebraska is the best offense Indiana's seen. Indiana's possibly the best defense Nebraska's seen, with the possible exception of Illinois. But Nebraska also lost that game, and that was at home at night in a ranked game in what was meant to be a highly charged environment, and Illinois was still able to win that game. So the reason I bring up the bye week is it does feel like there's going to be a wrinkle somewhere that these two teams haven't shown, whether it's something Nebraska does defensively, something Indiana does offensively or defensively, whatever. Maybe Dylan Raiola going back into practice, polishing some things. It feels like there's going to be a wrinkle that the winning coach is going to point to the bye week and say, we worked on that. That made us better, and that was a big reason why we won. And I'm just kind of fascinated to know, if that's the case, what that is.
A lot of talk of recruiting this weekend. The list is long. Indiana working on getting Juju Lewis in, but one of the names that will be in is unique because Byron Baldwin, who had been committed to Indiana, a great defensive back, and then was being recruited heavily by Colorado and a few others, but he decommits and didn't commit anywhere else and says Indiana's still involved. But whenever somebody says that, that they're not. It's just
right. No, the whole I'm keeping them in my process, but it's sort of like, well, but you already committed and decommitted. So
I always love that. But the fact that he is coming on a visit, that is a change. That's different. It is obvious that what Indiana is doing is catching his eye, because everything with, like, say, Colorado, it's a lot of bling, a lot of shine, but Indiana is just doing it. So I think that it has caught his attention, and he's like, okay, hold on here a second. So that's something that is very unusual to see, a guy that decommits but then comes back for a visit.
Yeah, I mean, it will be interesting. And again, this is kind of one of those things where, listen, is any single recruit, even Julian Lewis, like the most important thing that can happen for Indiana this weekend? No. Like let's be really clear. Even the best quarterback in the country, ripping up his USC commitment and flipping to Indiana on Sunday morning or whatever. And I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying, like, even that hypothetical, the most important thing that can happen for Indiana this weekend is a win. But all of this, and we've talked about this in so many different ways, and it's hard to kind of wrap your arms completely around this idea. But because it is just such a big one. It is so large and amoebic. But it is this idea that at virtually every turn since Curt Cignetti's hiring, or even really since the job opened in November of last year, when Indiana has been presented the opportunity to seize or, improve upon momentum, it has not wasted that. And that has been hiring Curt Cignetti, NIL fundraising, opportunities in the portal, the players they kept around, even some that, I'm not picking on him at all, but even like Donovan McCulley. Okay, it didn't work the way, Indiana hoped it would. That doesn't mean that Donovan McCulley recommitting back in December wasn't a really big deal at the time and didn't help push, this whole thing forward, if only just a few inches. And every time the opportunities presented itself for Indiana to impress somebody or to take the, another step forward or climb another rung higher, whatever metaphor you want to use, a program that has really struggled. I come back to this phrase that I used in something I wrote this morning or yesterday that came out this morning, I guess I should say. This program that has really, really struggled to meet the moment over and over and over again throughout its modern history, thus far has kept meeting that moment. Now, that doesn't mean Indiana's got to go 15-0 or 16-0 or whatever it is, and I guess it's 16-0 now, and win a national title for this all to be a success. But it does mean winning a game like this. And the reason it does is both because of the intangible stuff or the big picture stuff. You've got all these, recruits in town. I think my good friend Steve Wiltfong, who I worked with for a long time, I think he had Tyrone Burris, the kid from Warren Central, also potentially being in town. I think I saw that on social media. Sorry if I'm citing a competitor. Forgive me.
No, say it, man. Info's info, man. We're here to supply it.
The point is, it's not about any one recruit.
Is Steve with ESPN?
He's with, I think he's on 3 now.
On 3.
So, but it's not about any one recruit. It's not just about being on Big Noon Kickoff. It's not just about it being homecoming. Frankly, if you want to get down to the most basic nuts and bolts, you're favored. Like you're 6-0 ranked at home with a better record and a better ranking, and Vegas thinks you should win. You should win. That doesn't obviously work out that way all the time. But my point is, whether you're talking about who's going to be in town, whether you're talking about, what this game means to the course of the season, whether you're just talking about the basic matchups and whether or not Indiana should be able to beat Nebraska, everything feels like a big opportunity for Indiana, if it wins this game, to really advance this whole thing meaningfully, whether it's how you're perceived nationally, whether it's what your ambitions are this season, whether it's guys that recruits you might impress, yada yada yada, whatever. It's all kind of wrapped up in this neat package that just requires Indiana to win the game. And the question obviously is, can Indiana do that? And I think it's it reminds me a little bit of the feeling around that Kentucky game in 2011, that basketball game against Kentucky, where you saw this groundswell of so many things moving in the right direction for Indiana basketball. And here was your biggest rival, the number one team in the country, on national television. I think it was ESPN, but I mean, ESPN is pretty much national television at this point. You're the game of the day. You are the absolute signature, sort of matchup of the afternoon. Can you seize that? Can you seize that opportunity? Because this is what, the Kentucky game is a good example of what can happen if you do. And I'm awfully curious to see if Indiana does.
Yeah, and Cignetti has made a career out of doing those kinds of things. And I think he relishes that, not in a cocky way, but he relishes that challenge. That's why there's a lot of talk about Indiana is going to, it's going to be nearly impossible for him to hold on to him. And I'm not quite in that school. I think he enjoys the challenge of doing something that has not been done at a place that it hasn't been done. He's doing what no one else has been able to do. And I think he enjoys the hell out of that.
Yeah. I mean, he said early on in his tenure, he said the reason that Indiana interested him was because it was a challenge he felt like he'd met before. I think in particular, he was referring to Elon, where in fairness, he only was for 2 years. But I think he also saw some similarities to James Madison, not obviously in terms of the prominence of the program, but the challenge of bringing it up to the FBS level. He just said, I felt like I had some, some experience with this kind of job, with this kind of, with this sort of challenge. And, listen, coaches come and go. I think we've all learned that. What I've told Indiana fans who've said, should I be worried about Kurt Signetti leaving? What if he's linked to this job? What if this job opens? Whatever. What I've told them is just generally, I do take Scott Dolson at his word that he is committed to putting all the resources he possibly can into maintaining any football success that his department can build. And that is going to include trying to, I strongly suspect at this point, trying to tie down Kurt Signetti to a
long-term deal
contract at some point this fall. But what I've also told Indiana fans is just don't worry about that right now. You can't control it. You're like, exactly. And you've never, the Indiana fan, have never seen a season like this. Indiana hasn't done this in 57 years. So just
enjoy the ride, baby.
Exactly. Just enjoy what's going on and don't place too much expectation on it. Don't get yourself to a place where it's like, and I don't know if you and I talked about this last week or not, Jim, but don't get yourself to a place where it's like, oh, well, now I'll be disappointed if they don't make the playoff, if they don't win 10 games, if they don't beat Michigan or whatever. It is a little bit, again, like that 2012 IU basketball season where the minute they beat Kentucky and sort of guaranteed for themselves a path to making the tournament, to putting, all the program building sort of headaches and growing pains behind them and all that, that was like the most sort of just like joy-filled season. It was just like it was almost like they could do no wrong. They had one 3-game losing streak in Big Ten play, but other than that, it was like the whole season was just sort of like, hey, this is just fun, and anything that's a setback, we're not going to worry about it because we're just having too much fun, basically. This season is like that, and you'll really never get you don't get this season again. Indiana may come back next year and be even better, but by that point, people will expect things of Indiana,
right?
And there will be a minimum level of expectation and a bar that Indiana has to clear, and you'll be more stressed watching your Maryland game or your Rutgers game or your Purdue game or whatever, because suddenly there's something to lose. Suddenly there's something like, oh no, what if this doesn't happen? And that's why I've just told people, like, just enjoy this, because this is the one time. I think the Purdue game is probably the one big exception. You want to win the bucket if you're Indiana. You haven't won it in 5 years. But beyond that, like if you're Indiana, like you're just enjoying this, because
Absolutely.
You don't get seasons that are, almost nothing but good vibes very often.
Absolutely. Zach Osterman, the IU insider for the Indy Star. Make sure you are giving him a follow and be a subscriber. Keep local papers alive. Zachary, we will see you later on today, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, as always.